In the name of the one and only, today's talk is the first ayah of the Quran, the first revelation. More specifically, it's the very first word, and even more specifically, it's just one single letter of the alphabet. I'm not here to preach. That's not my habit. I'm not even here to teach. I'm here to stir up ideas. I'm looking for how to address issues from a new angle, from a different angle, so we understand maybe the same issue, but from a different perspective. So, as the title suggests, اقرأ آنگاه که اندیشه صدا می کند. To me, the most important part here is the andisha, which is the thought. I would define God in that context. This definition may not be Quranic, it's probably philosophical. And that definition is God is thought continuously thinking itself. Thought continuously thinking itself. خداوند اندیشه است که پیوست به خود می اندیشد. بنان خداوند هم فاعل است و هم مفعول است، هم اسم است و هم فعل است. ولی در نهایت خداوند اندیشه یعنی تفکر است، تفکر خلاق، به اون سبب میگیم خالق. این خلاقتش به دور خودش میپیچد. خداوند هم محور خلاقیت است، هم منبع خلاقیت است. در خلاقیت اقلا دو چیز مطرح است، سه چیز. از نگاه این که کسی که چیز را از هیچ چیز پیدا می کند به وجود می آورد. اصطلاح لاتینیش کریاتو اکس نهیلو، ایجاد کننده. کلمه اصطلاح قرآنیش فاطر است. خداوند فاطر است، یعنی از هیچ خلق می کند. در مرحله دوم خلاقیت به معنای آنچه که خلق است از خلق شده خلق می کند. اونجاست که میگیم خالق است. و در این سطح خلاقیت باز هم به دو نوع تقسیم بندی میشه. یکی که خداوند خالق بلا واسطه است، یعنی خودش ایجاد میکنه. هرگاه بخواهد که چیز بشود میشود. کن فیکون، امر میکند باش پس میشود. یعنی استدلال، یعنی در آنجا استدلال نیست، واسطه نیست، علت و معلول نیست، مسبب و سبب نیست. این یک نوع است. یکی این که خداوند خالق است که از آنچه که مخلوق است مخلوق خود را واسطه خلقت بعدی میکنه. مثلا ما انسان ها خلق میکنیم با توانمندی که خداوند نصیب ما ساخته. در رابطه با خداوند و بنده ما مخلوق هستیم. در رابطه با آنچه که ما مخلوق یک چیز دیگر را ایجاد میکنیم ما خالق هستیم. مثلا وقتی که ما یک میز میسازیم ما خالق میز هستیم. در سطح سوم گفتم که اولیش فاطر است، دومیش خالق است، سومیش امر خلقت است که خداوند خلق میکند، ایجاد میکند، ولی از خود به او استقلال نمیبخشد. یعنی در خلاقت استقلال است. خداوند ما را خلق کرد، به ما عقلانیت داد، قوه عقلی و توان داشتن خواسته و اراده بنان ما مستقل هستیم در اعمال خود. این خلاقیت است. ولی در بخش امر خداوند یک چیز را خلق می کند ولی از خداوند جدا نیست. مثلا درباره این که قرآن می فرماید قل روح من امر ربی، روح در نتیجه امر خداوند است. اینجا امر به معنای امر کردن نه، فرمان دادن نیست. امر به معنای این که خداوند ایجاد کرده و متصل با خود ایجاد کرده. چون در سطح روح ما با خداوند پیوسته هستیم. Let me summarize in English. In terms of creation, Quran speaks of 3 levels. Creation from nothing, and creation independently, and creating things that are still connected to the divine power. Spirit is the connected creation. Our personalities and physical being is the independent creation. And then the creation ex nihilo is the beginning of, say, the world of existence, where there was nothing and nothing became something. And of course, humans don't have that ability. Now, in respect to the talk, which is based on this concept of God is a thought that continuously thinks itself, we have to think the issue that I often repeat and insist on is that the biggest blasphemy, in my opinion, is when we give God a personality, a personhood. We are humans, and we cannot perceive another being acting, seeing, hearing, touching, all the faculties that we have. We cannot perceive that being in any other form than the form of a human. So when we interpret, for instance, the verse of throne, Ayat al-Kursi, that God doesn't sleep and doesn't get tired and all that, we are basically defining human faculties, but that's not what God is, because we have also attached the personality to it. So God does not have a personality. And it's in this context that when we discuss God, because the concept of God is a very, very old concept from cultures of long ago, then we have trouble detaching that. Detaching the personality element from God, the divine entity. So, when we humans, represented by one individual person by the name of Muhammad, who went to the cave of Hira, when he heard this one word, Iqra, who was talking? And what was he saying, he or she or it? Let me recite the 5 verses. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. That's the extent of it. But there are keywords in it, and the keyword in the first one is, I don't think I need to translate because most of us know, sure. Read in the name of thy sustainer. That first word. Iqra is translated both as recite and as read. In my opinion, the recite is not a good translation because it implies that, yeah, you can chant, you can sing, you can recite. you are not actively engaged in a process. And for something of that magnitude, that significance, this could not have been an exercise in just reciting. But the word read is more relevant because it's an active engagement. Read involves a participation on your part. Read is a response. Now, if we think about the very first concept of Iqra, it is both a command and an invitation. So you will have to go to the time of the Prophet. Why would he go to the cave? He did it habitually for 40 nights. Every year, went to a retreat. And what was the retreat? Well, he lived in a small town called Mecca or Becca. That's a whole other story we can discuss at some point. He wanted to shun the sense world. He wanted to close the wall on the sense world. He wanted to turn off the sense reality. The sense world is the world that we can perceive through our senses. There are things in it we see, we touch, we smell, we walk, and we do. That's what defines our world. Suppose you were born blind at birth, you wouldn't know the meaning of color. If you were born deaf, you wouldn't know the meaning of sound, for example. And so, for that person, the world is that much smaller. And there are other areas of perception for which the human perception is incapable. For instance, we know something through our scientific endeavors called the X-ray, the infrared, the ultraviolet, which we don't see. In other words, our human sense capacity is not capable, but we cannot deny its existence. So the sense world is what is out there based on our experience, but that's not all the worlds there are. And so when we say Rabb al-Alameen, God is the sustainer of the many worlds. The word many is not there, but the plural implies that there has to be more than one. Now imagine the Prophet being there in that cave, which had nothing, it didn't even have light. So his eyes couldn't see anything. There was no sound. There was nothing to touch, nothing to smell. In other words, all his senses were completely turned off. Now, in this kind of situation comes the command read. Now, think about the logical part of it. What part of this is logical? If you ask an illiterate person to read, ask an illiterate person to read. Doesn't make sense, does it? What part of it makes sense when you ask a person to read something in the dark? There's no light, and you say, read. It's most nonsensical, most irrelevant command. Doesn't make sense. And then you ask someone to read that even if he could read, there's nothing to read from. No paper, no book, no nothing. So what does that mean? At one level, people might say, well, the Prophet went and made up something. This is just a speck of his imagination. He dreamed, he hallucinated, he was hungry because he was fasting. You can give it all kinds of explanations because you want to make sense out of that in the context of a sense world. So if the only world you believe in is the sense world, you have to make sense of it by rationalizing it. Because otherwise, like I said, it doesn't make sense. But that very circumstance invites us to a different thing. it is telling us that the sense world is not only world. Reason and perception is not the only way to see things and understand, that there's another world too. So the circumstance is totally illogical. Out, as we say in English, and I think that's a very appropriate expression, it was out of this world. And it was. Now, the other idea here is that it says that first, read in the name of thy sustainer who created. Now here are the keywords. The word read had those significance and some others that we'll get to. And the other word is the word khalaq, the one who created, and the whole creation is there. And in the next verse it says, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ. Now, let me take a slight detour here. That very argument that that I explained to you, that nothing was logical in it, some people explain that, like I said, that the prophet was hallucinating, hungry, and all that. Others said, well, he's a good poet, because this thing rhymes so beautifully. And this is rhymed prose, Nasr Musajja, which is the most beautiful kind of poetry because it doesn't sacrifice syntactical structure. In other words, you can read it in the exact subject, verb, object order, depending on the language, and it still rhymes. And there were other people who said, well, he's not a poet, he's a madman. And the Quran is answering those concerns and critique in two different places. In a very detailed way, the surah called Najm explains that. And Najm is a surah, actually the ayah itself, is often, again in my humble opinion, not translated correctly. We were talking about translation earlier. Most people translate Najm as what?
The star.
No. The word for star in Arabic is kawkab, kawakib. That's a star. It's a celestial body. It either reflects light or it emits light. That is kawkab. Najm literally is an emitted light from a source that no longer exists, which is the exact astrophysicist definition in the 21st century. That oftentimes we see the light of stars that come towards us, and those stars have died many, many years ago. In other words, the star doesn't exist anymore. The light is traveling, of course, at the speed of light, and it has reached us after millions of years, and therefore what we see doesn't have existence in terms of the distance, reality.
ببخشید میتونیم بگیم نوریه که منبعش از بین رفته.
از بین رفتن، بله. So, when that surah begins with وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى, again, it's very detailed. I think it will be interesting if you have time to read Surah Najm, which is pretty much explaining to the unbelievers, the issue of their disbelief. Why they didn't believe the Prophet. For us, it's easy. 1400 years later, it's our reality. But for them, they had to think about it at that very time. Is this man telling the truth? Does it make sense? I mean, people are logical. I think in the context of Surah Najm, the word Najm has a different meaning. And that meaning, if I can take the liberty, is the unfolding, the unfurling. what we call revelation. Revelation is, the reason I prefer the unfurling is that in a revelation something is hidden and becomes revealed. And in the unfurling there is more poetic sense to it. The reality was there all the time. Nobody denied God. But then how is God perceived and understood in a different way? So it would be this unfolding, which in this case is what? The references to that first word, Iqra. Something spoke. It unfurled. It raised a question. It gave a command. An unfolding as it comes down from on high. On high. وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى. High here is not geographic. In the universe there is no high and low, there is no left and right, there is no north and south. Those are all realities of an earth-based lifestyle that we have. There's no north and south there. But when the Quran is talking about from on high, in my opinion, it implies that where we are in this little third rock from the sun, reality in this earth, that this is not the center of anything. Remember, people thought the earth was the center of the universe, and we know all that stuff. But this one is telling us that you are not the center of anything. The center is high up somewhere else, and from there something comes to us. Now, when we emphasize the word that it comes down to us, you can use the word nuzul in Arabic. That would be, if at least for the sake of argument we accept that there's a higher ground, higher reality, and something came down, what would it require in return? If something comes down, then something could go up. Now, this wasn't a telegram that was sent to us. It wasn't a telegram. It was divine. It was God as thought that came to empower us, but not to stay with us, but rather to elevate us to a higher ground. And for those of you who were in my lecture on Ibn Sina, remember there was a circle. The circle of descent coming down, God as the Aqli Kul, and we came down to earth. We became human. The next part of it is that we have to go back up. So God's Spirit comes down to human. It empowers humanity to elevate humanity back to the level of God. So all the fikr, zikr, all the 7 valleys of, purification, all the things that we do it to go back to God. The Quranic verification would be inna lillahi, we came from him, wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So, when the Iqra came, what was the purpose? Not because someone needed to recite something. It came to us so it can take us back there. We have to complete that loop. And in Surah Najm, it also talks about Qaba Qawsain in a different context. I'm translating that as Qaws. Qawsain is used in Tasniya, in dual form. If you put 2 Qaws together, you make the circle. So the descending half of the parentheses, Qaws, and the ascending one, going back there. So I think in that particular experience, the divine connects with humanity. And as I said in the beginning, our problem is that we give God a personality and then we look for a reason. How did he do it? Where was God standing? And then you get in all kinds of trouble. And as I keep saying, do not translate the Quran literally. And even more so, do not translate it literally without a context, because that's when you lose everything. So, God wanted to connect to humanity. So what was God? Now, yes, I interpret it as thought, but God is also power. And power in the sense of empowerment. And that's why when you go to the Quran, this particular chapter is 96, I think. You start with Iqra al-Alaq. And then the chapter that follows immediately is Qadr. So, Inna anzalnahu fi laylatul Qadr explains. Now, remember, Surah Najm refutes the argument of the unbelievers, but Surah Qadr explains it, and it's talking to humanity in different. So I think we should read all these surahs together. Now, since I'm talking about surahs, let me throw one more. And that one would be to understand, like I said, the sense perception and the sense reality. This was the first revelation. But there's also the first revelation of the Quran that has the detached letters in the beginning. Muqata'at. And what is the first surah with the first huruf muqata'? No, that's the way it's written in the Quran, in the Mashaf that we read. That's not the way it was revealed. The first revelation was Noon wal Qalam. Now, what is Noon? Again, most of these are my interpretations, so if anyone is going to get in trouble with that, would be me. If there is an image, a picture in the Quran, have you seen a picture in the Quran? I have seen one. Okay, Noon is the picture. When you write Noon, it's like the half circle. Remember those two circles? Now you turn it around. There is the visible world, and then there is the invisible world. We call it the physical and the metaphysical. We have discussed that in one of the previous lectures. So Noon, the dot of the Noon, is the center of the circle. The rest of the Noon is the visible half circle. And the other half is invisible. So we got the Hal Khat concept. God is the center of the universe. Everything is around it. Not everything that God has created is visible. So it's just like the letter Nun. Half circle with a center there. And the other half is always there, of course. But it's just that our perception doesn't get it. Nun also is the name of a fish. What fish was that?
Zunnun.
Right. What does Zunnun mean? Sahibe Dota. So where is the other two? The only way you get the other two is to accept that there is the invisible part of the Nun. One Nun is down below. That's one. The other Nun comes from top. Okay? So you create the circle. And the dual form in Arabic is Zannun. In other words, a person who would understand, or an entity or a symbol that would have the two halves. Since we talked about Zannun, does anyone know who Zannun was? A great Sufi from Egypt. Zannun al-Misri. So why was he Zannun? Why was he called the man of the two noons, the two ends? Because he was addressing the physical and the metaphysical. At least that's my take on it. Now, those are the two noons. But what happened to the fish story? Someone else was involved in that.
Yunus?
Exactly. What's in the middle of Yunus? There's another noon. And what happened to Yunus? He was swallowed by perhaps a whale or a big fish. And he came out live. The Quran and the scriptural books describe it like this man was trying to preach, and then he got impatient, and then he somehow had to be swallowed by a fish, so he was taught a lesson, not to back off, go and do your mission, and he went back and did it. It gave him the courage, because God gave him the reality that you can be dead. Would you like to have lived a life that did not produce anything? So what would it be like when you're inside a fish?
Pretty dark.
Exactly, in the darkness. So he was in the dark. He was taken to the darkness to see what? To see light. Okay? Yunus was taken to the darkness to see light. Now, you take him out of the mouth of the fish. Where do you see darkness? Let me give you a clue. It has to do with literacy. How do you say it in Arabic? When a person is literate?
Homie.
No.
Isawad.
What's the word for black in Arabic?
Swat.
Aswad. So when you write, you're making the white paper black, right? So you become
Sawad.
There you go. So you take a white paper and you write black, dark, scribble in it, and that black, dark scribble brings you back to light. You see the contrast of the colors? So you can be in the dark to bring the light. Who else was in the dark? Who else was in the dark? The Prophet went to the darkness of the cave to bring the light. The same thing. See all these symbolic connections? All of them have the light and the darkness. And so when he came, that word Iqra was written in what color? Where would they get the black color for writing?
Because it is dark.
No. When they wanted to make ink, first the word for the ink bottle is what in Arabic? That's in Farsi. Okay. The word for the ink bottle is noon. The same noon.
Wow.
Okay? So the ink bottle is noon. The fish is noon. Noon is also the name of Jonah, Yunus. And we got the Zunun. Is that enough noons for you?
Yeah, that's it.
Well, then we have to put something in that black ink bottle. And what did we put? No, before we get it, don't make it that tough right away. So the pen would have to touch something in there, and that would be what color? And where do you get that from?
Soot.
From?
Soot.
Very good. Now you get that from the soot. You turn on a candle. The candle makes smoke. So they would hold a glass on top of the candle, so the smoke will get collected there. Then you wash that black smoke, and it becomes your black ink. Siyahi qalam. So where did that blackness come from?
Light.
From light. Okay? So it came from the light of the candle that enlightens us. And you will be delighted to hear that the light comes from. Light goes to the black smoke comes to black ink. The black ink becomes a writing, a word that enlightens us back. See all the contrasts? Symbolically speaking. So, now you got the ink bottle, you got the ink, and you got all this stuff, and perhaps you got the paper too, or something to write on. But what do you write with? Qalam. Mm-hmm. And what does the Quran talk about? In that very first revelation. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. And so, yes, the rhyming is there. Now, taught human by the pen. What does that mean? What is the significance of a pen?
Literacy.
Sorry?
Literacy. To be literate
pen.
in order to be able to write.
Universe.
Let's see. Pen would be the reason the significance for pen is that it is the only instrument that can distinguish us human beings from other beings in the sense that it enables us to have cumulative knowledge. With every other with every other living being, whatever life experience they have, they learn the experience, they try it, they live, sometimes they don't make it, they die, and that's it. So the knowledge of a living being is only insofar as the lifespan of that living being. How is that different with humans? Because the knowledge that we have was not necessarily all ours. For centuries and centuries, people who had knowledge, who accumulated knowledge, they recorded it, passed it on to the next generation, and then it became that. So I often argue that people think that Socrates was a very knowledgeable thinker, right? I think we have probably many more Socrates today than they had at the time of the Greek civilization. Why? Because we have the advantage of coming after them and dipping into that same inkwell and getting their knowledge. And so all our knowledge is not, our life is not, does not allow us to live long enough to learn as much. So the only thing that makes it possible is the pen. So often people argue, oh, humans are different because we have speech. Haywan and atak. Absolutely not. Yes, in some ways we are different, but I think that which gives us the most advantage is the pen, symbolically. And it's right there in that first revelation. So God is addressing humanity in the context that God connects, not with you as an individual, but you as the sustainer, the holder, the vessel of all human knowledge, or as much of the human knowledge of past and present. And therefore, it's a connection between the divine and the human at large, the historical human, the geographic human, and all other definitions that you can give. And so therefore, the kalam will have that significance. Now, the Arabic language is a noun-based language, not a verb-based. So every word starts in the form of a noun, and then it has all these derivatives. And the nouns are based on consonants. So they're called the radical consonants, not politically radical. Now, most of the words would have 3 consonants. Now, in Arabic, there's also a rule that's called the consonantal inversion. That is, the consonants, the 3 consonants in most words, not in most words, in some words, the place of the 3 consonants could change, but the meaning will not. In other words, if a consonant has, let me give you an example. Zawj, what does it mean? 2 or pair, juft, right? What does jauz mean? It has the same meaning. So whether you say zawj or jauz, The meaning doesn't change. Yes. But one is j, wa, z. One is z, wa, j. The consonants shifted, but the meaning remains the same.
Jaws means stay?
Yeah. So because when you open the jaws, the nut, there are two pairs inside. That's why they call it jaws.
جواز هندی بشم.
There you go.
Yep.
Most nuts have, now we are talking botany, most nuts have the two sides, right?
Yeah.
The seeds are split in two parts. And the Arabic word of it is the paired ones. So that's why we call those jaws. And so zawj is the same.
Okay.
Let me give you another example. How about nar, narya, or naira? Naira means what? From the fire. Nariya, from the fire, same meaning. So the consonants can change, the meaning remains the same. Let me give you another one. How about the word qarib? What does it mean?
Which Harry?
Close, very good. How about the word raqib?
The same?
No, it means also close. Now, we in the Muslim societies, we have advanced a whole lot, but in earlier times, in older times, in olden times, when we were a bit more civilized, people were allowed to marry out of their own choice, not because the parents decided. So when a girl was of marriage age and she needed to see a man of similar age to get married, they were allowed to see each other. I don't know if they had parks, but they must have had places. Now, then they had to send a chaperone. Everybody knows what a chaperone is. A chaperone is to observe them from a little distance, not too far.
I don't know.
Chaperone is raqib. Yeah. So the chaperone will be a person who will be sitting a little distance away and letting this young man and woman talk to each other and see if they like each other and so on and so forth. Exactly. So that person was called the raqib. And so in most of our poetry, when people complain about the raqib, is because they have more feeling, more excitement, and they want to be more intimate. Oh God, if that raqib was not there. So raqib is not the competitor. Raqib is the raqaba. Muraqib. The one who stays close by. And in tasawwuf we call muraqaba is what? Is the kind of worship which we do to stay close to God through spiritual intimacy and contemplation. So it's not that you do the namaz, the salat, that stuff, okay? It is just to stay close to God. And so that is called muraqaba. So raqaba and qaraba are exactly the same thing. You want to get too close to God for what? To become qarib, right? And when you want to get very, very close, what do? You sometimes get rid of yourself to be close to God, right? And if you want to get rid of yourself, what's the correct word for that? You sacrifice yourself, right? You sacrifice yourself because you want to be close to God. You want to say, like Halaj say, that I'm nothing, everything is God. Now what's the word for sacrifice? Qurbani comes from what? Qurb. So you see, all these words are connected there. That's why I love Arabic. Okay, that's Qurb. Now since I use the word salat, salat means what? Connection. So that would be, salat will be salawa, right? If you change the place of the consonants, wasala, wasla. So wasala and salawa is the same. Connecting. So again, these are not things that they discuss in the Arabic grammar the way the grammar is taught to us traditionally. For this you will have to go to a deeper level. And that deeper level, in my opinion, is that in the earlier human societies, they had more of symbolic writing. It was not phonetic. So the earlier forms were symbolic, and we have that still going on in Chinese language and the hieroglyphs of Egypt, which is symbolic. And then from symbolic, it moved on to the next level, which was syllabic, and then it moved to phonetic. It may not have happened in that order, so there are those three levels: symbolic, syllabic, and phonetic. I think that the Arabic alphabet, before it becomes phonetic, it had to have been symbolic, because sometimes like I said earlier, in the Arabic language you start with 5 consonants, 4 consonants, but most of them are 3 consonants. And in my book, there is a single consonant. I reduce it all the way. And of course, this is not in any Arabic grammar book. So again, if it doesn't make sense, it's because it's my... We move things to a single consonant, and all consonants do not have the same meaning. And the one single consonant I'm concentrating on in this discussion is the consonant for the letter. We did the letter nun, right? So that's one. One more. It's the letter qaf. Qaf is the symbol of power or empowerment. Like in the word qadir, qadir, qudra in Arabic. All of them means power, empowering, distributing power, all that. Why was the Quran revealed at what night? Qadr, which was the empowerment of humanity through God's Spirit. All these surahs and ayahs that I refer to, especially all the surahs, every one of them has the letter qaf in there, including the very first revelation when I said iqra, and I said we will concentrate on one single letter, that's the qaf. So we start with iqra, then the next line is, that same verse ends, the rhyming letter is qaf too. Iqra bismi rabbikal khalaq, we end with a qaf. Then the next one start with khalaq, khalaq al insana min alaq, you got the other qaf. And then the next one starts again with iqra wa rabbukal akram, and then the last one starts, the one after is alladhi alama bil qalam, you got the qaf there. And then it says alam al insana ma lam ya'lam, which we will discuss later. You go to Surah Qadr, inna anzalnahu fi laylatul qadr, and it questions you right there. We have brought this down to you on the night of power. But that power again can be translated in 2 ways. One, qadr, which is power. And who has all the power? What about us? Do we have power? We do not have power unless it's power given by God to us. Unless it's by His leave. Illa bi'izneh. Unless God has empowered us, we do not have power. It's just like to say that these lights do not have to brighten up unless they're connected to a source of power. We may not pay attention to all the wiring in the wall and all that. We are paying attention here. But if you say where it comes from somewhere else. So, in order to show that relationship of where the power is manifested and where it comes from, the word qadar shows both of them. One, it means power. Another interpretation is the portion of the power. Qadr wa andaza. how much of the power is given to you. So God has all the power, but He gives some power to you. And the power that is given to you, that is in your taqdeer. That is your share. That's your destiny. You were given destiny to have that much power. God had willed it. And the word for taqdeer is also used together with another word which also starts with the letter qaf. We are talking about the letter for power. Taqdeer wa start with qaf. Qismat. Taqdeer wa qismat. What is qismat? Again, from taqsim, sharing, division, the part that was given to me. So all of these words that have the power, implication of the power, it also shows that the source of the power is somewhere else and we have only some part of it. Qismat, taqdeer, qadr, qadir, qadr, and Laylatul Qadr and all that. So we have been empowered. Now, how were we empowered with what? No, we are going back to the first revelation. Remember, we are talking about only one word of the first revelation. Because the first revelation was the beginning of a book we call
Quran.
Starts with what letter? You got the qaf right there. So we have been empowered. The book of the Quran is the source of our power. And it's because of Quran we are Muslims. Without it, nothing. And so Quran empowers us. It's there. Now, and so we also have then, going back to the concept of all these qafs that we talked about. What was that first revelation? The first revelation with the detached letter, Nun wal, and it follows Nun wal qalam wa ma yasturun. What does that mean?
Whatever they write.
Exactly. And so God in a sense says, I take an oath or I swear, not in the way we do it in the courthouses, but sort of to validate God's power through the existence of another reality. For us, whenever we want to validate something with that which is very dear and very close to us, we use the highest thing to swear on. Banam Khudawand, ba Quran, ba Muqaddasat, all that. We go up. What do you think God has to do? There's nothing higher than that for God. So God comes down to us. So God says, by the day, by the night, by the weather, by the season, normal object that to us. And here it says, in the name of the pen, and that which it scribbles. I'm trying to sum it up, is that the divine, God Almighty, is a thought. And thought is not like fantasy thought. Thought in the context of a thought that continuously thinks itself. And this thought sounds itself in the word Iqra and the remaining of the revelation. And in it creates and makes reference to the creation in order to make us aware of the cumulative human knowledge. And then in that last verse it says, Alam al-insana ma lam ya'lam. In other words, you human beings who may take pride and arrogance too sometimes, thinking like, oh, you know all this stuff. Remember, a point in time when you knew nothing. Not only as an embryo, yourself, but as an early human form. And so therefore, that knowledge that has become yours, in which you have become in the two forms of creation we discussed. One was, God created us in how many ways? One, God created us as the first emanation, أولين مظهر خلقت, which was, we talked about that a month ago, عقل كل. The first emanation of God was as an intellect. So, إنسان عقلي, عقلاني. And then the second form is the physical. But in the physical, when we look at the formation of the embryo that clings on as what? Okay, now we did talk about the inversion of the vowels, right? Of the consonants. The consonantal inversion. Now take aqala and alaqa. It's the same thing, right? Yeah, so خلق الإنسان من علق, right? So that's alaq, ma'alaq. And then take the alaq, the three letters, inverse them, and you get aql. Make sense? Yeah. Okay, now, what does the word aql mean? Now, not semantically. Semantically, aql means intellect, the intellect. But etymologically, aql means a knot, aqal, which is what we put around our heads, at least some do, which is a knot, right? So, the aqala goes around your head, the aql is inside your head, and what your aql does is what? Ta'aqul, and ta'aqul means what? In mantiq, which has the qaf, ta'aqul, which has the qaf, it is istidlal, reasoning, syllogism. And what does syllogism do? It takes two things, connect them together, exactly, to explain one through the other. He was hungry, therefore he ate, for example. Oversimplified example. So, aql is tying a knot between two things, establishing a relation. What about alaqa? It's exactly the same thing. It's the egg and the sperm. They tie together, and so we come into form. So whether we think of ourselves in the physical sense, how we were created in the beginning, the same three letters are involved. Exactly. Or when we think of ourselves as a spiritual creation, as a rational creation, it's the same thing, aqala, from aql. And so we are connected one way or another. These two are, like I said, most people will probably not go that far in trying to connect things that they will say, well, it's just the germ cell, that's what the Quran says. They will give you 2-3 interpretations. But like I said, I'm not interpreting it semantically. I'm going etymologically, symbolically, and that's why I said the essence of the whole talk was just to talk about that one letter, qaf, which means empowerment, but also outside of the Quranic language, words that contain qaf in Arabic generally are words that implies exaggeration, superiority, excesses, or maximization of things. So for instance, if we talk about the highest place on the face of earth, that's qulla, so it has to have qaf. The lowest place on the face of earth, qa'r, it has the qaf. The longest time in the past. So it's the excesses, whether it's time, space, or any other form, the qaf is there. So now you might ask a question like, how were the Arabs so smart to come up with this specific letter and put it in their alphabet and make it part of their vocabulary? I'm thinking it was more than some smart Arab who thought out of an Arabic. And that's why I'm saying that we often become too arrogant. We do not give enough credit to earlier human civilizations. So the vocabulary, when it was created, how it was created, and I, as a linguist, I have no idea how this happened. But it just cannot be just an accident. For all these words, like I was explaining to you, to have so much interconnection in terms of writing, and so much connection in terms of its meaning, and so much connection in terms of its symbol, at the level of language, and even more so at the level of understanding the divine. And with that, I will end the talk, hoping that I have confused you enough to think about it for next time. Qaqnus, exactly. So Qaqnus is what? Which does what? Whose life doesn't end. It can. Qaqnus is phoenix.
Oh.
Okay, it lives a whole life. It burns, and then it comes back to life. In other words, it's eternal, no end.
It comes from
Ashes. Yeah, it rises from its own ashes. Nothing can do that. So again, it has not only one but two qafs in there. Of course. What is Koh Qaf? It simply means the highest mountain. We are somehow assuming that it has to be in the alphabet. Not so. Koh Qaf is the highest mountain. Again, imagine. Exactly. And so, what mountain? What bird was there?
Simon.
In Arabic, Qaqnus, Koh Qaf, and all. The legendary birds may not be necessary because they are legends. Yeah, every culture has one of these. Yeah.
It's a very interesting discussion of the subject, but I think it would help us understand better and deeper, and to remember it better. If it is possible to convert it into a graphical, because it lends itself to graphics.
Right. Yes.
Because you're taking one word and expanding it graphically
Yes. Yeah.
into a graphic rendering.
I think I did in one of the earlier ones. To me, the letter Qaf, how do you write it? What does that mean? No, the shape of the letter Qaf is the symbol of infinity. It keeps going, spinning and spinning and spinning. That's your Qaf. Now, it came from earlier Greek architecture, for those of you who are specializing. In Greek architecture, the idea was one way to reach God was to go to Mount Olympic, right? To Mount Olympus. And there you would, how would you send a message, a telegram, Twitter to God? Morse code? No, you would call God. And how would God respond? No, it did. It always did. In this city, it didn't. So if you wanted to talk to God and hear God, you went to Mount Olympus, and you will address God, and the echo will come back.
Yeah.
So the echo was God calling you back.
Wow.
Now, so every time he didn't have to go to the Mount Olympus because it was too far or inconvenient or whatever. So then they built their places of worship, and these worship places were supposed to symbolize the height of Mount Olympus. So when they built the columns, at the top of the column, they meant the Qaf shape. So the Corinthian style for architects, the Corinthian style of column building in Greece had the symbol of Qaf in there. And of course, they were not writing in Arabic, but they were writing in the symbol of infinity. So at the top of the column is that loop, which means, imagine that this goes as far as Mount Olympus. It reaches God. Now, later religions in Europe, like Christianity, tried to imitate the same of trying to reach God. Because we had an earlier attempt by the Babylonians to remember the tower they built? Because they wanted to reach God. Europeans tried to reach God, God, with T. Now, use God as an adjective for buildings, steeples, sharp, high buildings, churches. What kind of architecture was that? Gothic, exactly. So Gothic was when the Europeans, instead of building columns like the Greeks, they wanted to build high steeples for their churches, sharp, way, way, way up, so that they could reach God. And so that style was called Gothic because they were reaching God. Same Greek thought, right? Babylonians. And so there you go to that, and that will connect you to the Mount Qaf, Koi Qaf. But now, if that was the symbol of infinity, what happened to it? What is the symbol of infinity today?
I want to today ask you a question. Why it's like that?
That one, the symbol we use for infinity is only about 150 years old. That's a modern one. A German scientist came up with the idea to, a twisted circle. But traditionally it was always the shape of the letter Qaf, which, like we discussed in the whole lecture, implied empowerment, excesses, exaggerations, highest, lowest, widest, longest,